The California coastline stretched endlessly, jagged cliffs cutting into the restless Pacific, waves smashing against the rocks below with a deep, resonant roar that seemed almost alive. Emily Carter leaned out of the passenger side window, the wind lashing at her hair like whips, tugging at her jacket, stinging her cheeks with salty spray. She laughed, loud, reckless, free, the kind of laughter that meant the world was hers, even if only for a fleeting moment. Beside her, Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel with calm precision, but his eyes kept darting to her. The corners crinkled in a soft, almost imperceptible smile. Every glance was a question, a silent admiration. Is she truly happy? "Spring break in California," Emily whispered, her voice almost lost in the howl of the wind. "Feels unreal." Jake's response was a nod, his lips curving slightly. "Unreal in the best way," he said, though his gaze remained distant, scanning the road ahead and the endless horizon beyond. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, an edge of worry he refused to voice. Emily didn't notice, too caught up in the thrill of the open road, the salty tang of the ocean air, and the freedom that came with it. The car rattled along the narrow coastal highway, hugging the cliffs as the sun began its violent descent into the horizon. Golden-orange streaks tore across the sky, painting clouds in bruised purples and fiery reds, shadows stretching long and unnatural across the asphalt, as if the land itself was reaching for them. The cliffs towered like ancient sentinels, jagged teeth against the molten sky, and Emily felt a shiver run through her spine, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming beauty, and something else she couldn't quite name. Her laughter faltered when she saw it. Figure. A single silhouette standing at the very edge of one cliff, motionless, backlit by the dying sun. Emily squinted, her pulse jumping. Who, or what, is that? The shape was impossibly still, too deliberate, too human, but somehow wrong. Her stomach twisted. "Jake, did you see that?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind and waves. He glanced sideways, his brow furrowing. "See what?" There's someone," she pointed shakily, her fingers trembling. "On the cliff, watching us." Jake's eyes followed hers. For a second there was nothing. The road was empty. No one. Only the crumbling cliffs and the endless sea. He let out a short, almost forced laugh. "You're seeing things. Just shadows. The sun, the wind." But Emily didn't laugh. She couldn't. There was a weight in her chest, a tightening that made her throat dry. The figure hadn't moved, hadn't waved, hadn't even seemed to breathe. Yet it was there, stark against the horizon, and her gut screamed at her that it was aware of them, that it had seen them, and it wasn't welcoming. Emily's grip on the window frame tightened. Her knuckles went white. She tried to force herself to laugh, to shake it off, but the sound caught in her throat, harsh and strangled. "Jake, I swear," she began, but the words faltered. Her mind raced. Should we turn around? Keep driving? Call someone? She hated that she felt this panic rising. Hated that it was creeping into the edges of what had been a perfect, carefree afternoon. The wind picked up, a sudden sharp gust that made the car shudder. The sound of the waves surged louder, as if responding to her fear, crashing against the rocks in chaotic bursts, spraying salty foam into the sky. Emily shivered, hugging herself instinctively. The sun, now a molten orb sinking fast, cast the cliffs into deep, shifting shadows. Every crevice seemed like a mouth, every jagged rock a claw reaching for them. The figure hadn't moved, but the shadow it cast seemed to grow, stretching unnaturally, as if the darkness itself had substance, a silent promise. Jake finally reached over, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. His hand was warm, grounding, but his voice was tense now, a subtle tremor betraying his calm facade. "It's nothing, Em. I've got you. We're fine. Just don't stare too long, okay?" Emily nodded, trying to believe him, trying to let the thrill of the road return, the beauty of the sunset and the wild, open highway wash away the prickling sense of dread. But the figure remained in her mind's eye, carved into her vision. She could feel it there, even if Jake couldn't. And that feeling gnawed at her sanity, twisting her excitement into fear. As the road curved sharply around another cliff, the figure seemed closer. Her heart leapt into her throat. She blinked and it was gone. For a split second relief surged. But then her stomach dropped. The last glimpse of shadow lingered at the edge of the horizon, not moving, not breathing, but waiting. Emily's mind screamed. This isn't normal. Nobody should be out there. Nobody should even exist here, not like this. Her chest tightened. She turned to look at Jake, hoping for reassurance, for proof that this was just imagination. But his jaw was tight. His hands gripping the wheel, eyes focused, but sharp, a little pale. She realized then that maybe he saw it too, or maybe he just felt it. The final rays of the sun bled into the ocean, leaving a violet twilight. Shadows deepened unnaturally across the cliffs, the wind whispering and howling, carrying voices she wasn't sure were real. Emily's laughter had vanished completely. All that remained was a pulse of fear, the realization that something unseen was alive and aware, and that they were driving straight toward it. She leaned closer to Jake, voice trembling. Jake, I don't like this. Something's wrong. We shouldn't be here. Jake's hand found hers, squeezing gently. We'll be fine. Promise. Just keep your eyes forward, okay? Don't let it get to you. Emily wanted to believe him, but she couldn't shake the figure in her mind. Watching. Waiting. And as the car rounded the next cliff, disappearing into the deepening purple night, Emily realized the truth she didn't want to admit. Something out there had already chosen them. And it wasn't welcoming. The beach house was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of place that felt like it belonged in a travel magazine, not somewhere you'd rent for a few restless spring break nights. Polished wooden floors reflected the soft glow of the setting sun, while floor-to-ceiling windows framed the endless ocean, waves rolling and crashing in a hypnotic rhythm. Emily walked barefoot across the room, feeling the smooth, cool wood under her feet, letting the ocean breeze tangle her hair. She smiled, inhaling the scent of salt and pine from the surrounding cliffs, letting herself sink into the fragile illusion of safety. Behind her, Jake wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. She could feel the warmth of him, the steady heartbeat under his chest. "You nervous?" he whispered, his voice soft and intimate, brushing against her ear. Emily pressed her cheek to his chest for a moment, drawing comfort from the rhythm of his heart. "Just a feeling," she replied, but she didn't know if she meant the excitement of being here or the unease stirring somewhere in the back of her mind. Their relationship had always been intense, burning bright and reckless, but complicated. Emily loved Jake more fiercely than she thought she could ever love anyone, yet there was something he never spoke of, a shadow lurking beneath the surface of his calm, confident smile. She tried to ignore it, tried to lose herself in the moment, but a whisper of doubt lingered, faint but persistent. Later that night, the quiet was shattered. The rest of their friends arrived, Lena, Mark, and Ryan, bringing chaos, laughter, and a surge of energy that threatened to fill every corner of the house. Music spilled from speakers, a pulsing beat that seemed at odds with the eerie stillness outside. The group danced and joked, tossing drinks and teasing one another, trying desperately to drown out the low, unsettling hum of the waves beyond the windows. The night air carried a biting chill, the ocean wind sneaking in through slight gaps in the frames, tugging at Emily's hair and sending shivers down her spine. Despite the energy around her, Emily couldn't ignore the nagging unease. She watched Jake move among their friends, laughing, talking, but slipping away every so often, disappearing toward quiet corners or the balcony. Something in her chest clenched each time he left, an instinctive anxiety that she tried to push down. Eventually, she could no longer ignore it. She rose quietly from the couch, careful not to alert their friends, and followed him. The music throbbed behind her, masking her footsteps as she ascended the narrow stairs to the balcony. Jake was leaning against the railing, the night wind tugging at his hair, his phone faintly glowing in his hand. Emily approached cautiously. "Who were you texting?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Jake froze, stiffening as if caught in a lie. "No one important," he said, but the hesitation was sharp, undeniable. Emily's gut twisted. She knew that it wasn't true, and the realization made her stomach churn with fear, not just for what he was hiding, but for the growing sense of something else, something unexplainable, hovering in the dark outside. Her eyes drifted down. And then she saw it. There, on the shoreline, dimly illuminated by the reflection of the moonlight on the waves, the figure stood again. Motionless, silent, perfectly still. Watching. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her heartbeat thrummed painfully against her ribs as the blood drained from her face. She couldn't tell if it was a woman or a man, alive or some specter, but she felt its gaze pierce her, settling on her like a weight. "Jake!" she whispered, trembling, gripping his arm. His warmth offered some comfort, but it didn't erase the terror blooming in her chest. Jake followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. He said nothing. But she saw it, the subtle shift in his shoulders, the quick glance downward, the tiny twitch of unease in his eyes. The figure hadn't moved, and yet Emily was sure it knew they were being watched. The wind picked up, carrying a low moan, a sound that could have been human or something else. The ocean thrashed against the rocks below in chaotic bursts, waves hissing like a warning. Shadows stretched across the balcony, twisting unnaturally as the moonlight bounced off the glass. Emily's mind raced, trying to rationalize what she saw, trying to tell herself it was an illusion, a trick of the night and the waves, but deep down she knew it wasn't. Jake's hand rested on her shoulder now, firm but tense. "It's nothing," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Probably someone walking the beach. We're fine. Look, I'm here. Nothing can touch us." Emily wanted to believe him, clinging to the warmth of his hand, the steady beat of his chest, but the figure remained in her mind, unyielding, unblinking. Why is it here? Why is it just standing? Why is it watching us? The questions pressed at her thoughts, insistent, gnawing at the edges of her fear. Her pulse pounded louder than the waves, her senses heightened. Every shadow seemed a potential threat, every gust of wind a whisper of something wrong. The figure didn't move, didn't signal, didn't react, but Emily felt it. "So where?" "Knows." Jake's eyes softened on her. "Hey, look at me. You're safe. I won't let anything happen to you." She wanted to believe that too. She clung to his words, clinging to the comfort, even as the figure below made her heart hammer with pure, primal panic. Her fingers tightened around his, nails digging into his palm. And then, as if the ocean itself echoed the unspoken threat, a sudden wave crashed against the rocks, sending a fine mist into the air. The figure seemed to shimmer in the spray, wavering, almost unreal. Emily stepped back, breathless, caught between fear and disbelief. Jake pulled her close again, wrapping her in his arms. "We're together. That's all that matters," he whispered. But Emily could still feel the weight of those unseen eyes, piercing through the night, watching, waiting, patient. The music from inside the house pulsed faintly through the walls, distant and insignificant against the raw, unshakable dread that now clung to her. She knew, with a sinking certainty, that this was no ordinary spring break night, and that whatever had chosen to watch them had been waiting far longer than they could ever imagine. And Emily felt, deep in her bones, that leaving the balcony, leaving the house, leaving the safety of Jake's arms, would not change a thing. The figure was patient. It was deliberate. And it was not welcoming. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the house seemed to inhale and hold its breath, and then exhale darkness. The power went out. The music that had been pulsing through the speakers, a frantic, energetic beat meant to drown the night, died mid-song. 1 second the room vibrated with laughter and sound. The next it was swallowed by silence so thick that it pressed against Emily's chest like a physical weight. The faint glow of the emergency lights flickered, casting jagged, sickly shadows across the walls. "Probably just a fuse," Mark said with a forced laugh, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. He lifted his phone, the flashlight trembling slightly as he scanned the room. The cone of light danced across the wooden floor, the walls, the furniture, but it didn't feel safe. Not even a little. Emily felt it before she could understand it. A shift in the air. It was subtle at first, a faint tightening in her chest, a prickling along her spine. Then the weight hit her. The atmosphere itself had thickened. The air smelled heavier, colder, as if something unseen had stepped into the house. She wanted to laugh it off, to tell herself it was imagination, but the instinct deep in her bones screamed otherwise. From somewhere upstairs came a sound that made her stomach twist in fear. A slow, dragging noise, deliberate, methodical, like nails scraping across the floorboards. It echoed, bouncing off the walls and ceilings, twisting in impossible ways. The group froze. Jake's hand immediately went to the baseball bat he had stashed by the stairs. "Stay here," he ordered, voice tight, low, almost shaking. But Emily didn't. She couldn't. Something clawed at her curiosity, at the terror twisting inside her. Against her better judgment, she followed him upstairs, each step heavier than the last. The hallway was darker than it should have been. The emergency light didn't reach here. Shadows clung to the corners, thick and unnatural, moving against the flow of the wind outside, twisting in impossible angles that made her eyes ache. Every portrait, every doorframe seemed to bend, to lean closer, to watch her with unseen eyes. Emily's heartbeat thumped in her ears, drowning out every other sound, yet the dragging noise continued. Slow, patient, deliberate. Jake stopped in front of the bathroom door. The wood groaned, warped under the unseen pressure. Then the door creaked open by itself, moving as if pushed by invisible fingers. Emily froze, the air thick and cloying, tasting faintly of cold iron. The bathroom mirror was fogged, the condensation rising and swirling as though breathing. First it was just mist. Then the words formed. Slowly, deliberately, as if etched by an unseen hand. "You left me." Emily's chest seized. She wanted to scream, but her voice refused to come. Her eyes widened in disbelief, terror curdling into panic. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, to flee, to throw herself down the stairs and out into the night. But she couldn't move. She was frozen in place, drawn into the horror of the message. "Jake," she whispered, voice shaking, raw. Her throat felt tight, dry, suffocating. But he wasn't looking at the mirror. Emily followed the direction of his gaze, and her stomach dropped into the pit of her spine. Behind her in the hallway, the shadows shifted differently. There, just at the edge of her peripheral vision, something coalesced. Figure. Pale, indistinct, yet human in shape. Watching. Waiting. Her breath hitched. She could feel the darkness pressing against her, and for the first time, she truly understood the difference between fear and dread. Fear was a warning. Dread was inevitable. "Emily," Jake said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do not turn around." She couldn't help it. Her body betrayed her, eyes snapping toward the figure. It didn't move, at least not in a conventional way, but it loomed. Its presence warped the shadows around it, bending them toward the floor, stretching, twisting, unnatural. Emily felt a cold tendril snake along her spine, up into her skull. I can see it," she stammered. The words sounded hollow even to her ears. What is it?" Jake's jaw clenched. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice tight with fear, though he tried to steady it. "But it's not normal. Stay close to me." The words on the mirror seemed to grow darker, almost pulsing in the dim light. Emily could almost hear them, a faint whisper curling in the edges of her mind. "You left me. You left me." The dragging sound grew louder, more deliberate, as if whatever was upstairs was moving closer, stalking, hunting, aware of their terror. Emily's thoughts raced. Why here? Why now? What did we do? She wanted answers, but every instinct told her that seeking them would be a mistake. She felt Jake's hand squeeze hers, grounding, solid. But even his presence was not enough to erase the feeling of being watched, of being judged by something patient, vengeful, waiting. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows, the ocean waves crashing violently against the rocks below in perfect, chaotic rhythm. The house seemed alive, echoing their panic, creaking in response to unseen forces. The shadows shifted again. Emily could see the figure more clearly now. Not fully, but enough. Hollow eyes, pale skin, movements that weren't quite human. Her heart thundered in her chest. We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't have come. Jake tightened his grip on the bat. Emily, he whispered, his voice urgent, low, almost shaking with fear he refused to show. Whatever it wants, we don't run. We don't. A sudden crash of sound from upstairs cut him off. Something slammed against the far wall, rattling picture frames and the light fixtures. Emily screamed, reflexively ducking, but her eyes never left the mirror, or the figure behind her. The mirror fog twisted once more, and the words shifted, letters dripping downward, forming a message that chilled her to the bone. You will pay. Emily gasped. She wanted to flee. She wanted to throw herself down the stairs, away from the whispers, the shadows, the unnatural presence, but she couldn't. She was rooted, paralyzed by horror, yet painfully aware of every detail. The cold brush of wind that snuck in through the broken window latch, the faint metallic scent in the air, the dragging sound coming closer. And she realized, with a sickening certainty, that whatever was here it knew everything. Her gaze met Jake's. His eyes were wide but resolute. He gripped her hand. We face this together, he whispered. Emily nodded, terror and love intertwining, and she prepared herself for the long, impossible night that had only just begun. The group huddled in the living room, the storm outside seemingly growing louder with every passing second. The waves crashed against the cliffs, violent and insistent, as if echoing the chaos that had taken over the house. It's just a prank, Ryan insisted, forcing a laugh that came out brittle and hollow. He held up his phone, the flashlight cutting thin beams across the wooden floors. Someone's messing with us. That's all. But no one believed him. Not really. Not Lena, who had been nervously gripping her jacket all evening. Not Mark, whose jaw was tight with tension. And certainly not Emily, whose gut coiled with a sense of something irredeemably wrong. Then Lena's phone began to record on its own. The screen lit up with a pale glow, illuminating her worried face, and the camera pointed straight down the empty hallway. Everyone froze, a collective unease settling like a lead weight in their chests. The house creaked and groaned, the wind outside whipping against the windows, carrying a faint icy spray of ocean mist into the room. Check it, Lena said, her voice shaking. She held the phone out, fingers trembling. No one moved for a moment. Then, reluctantly, Emily stepped forward. They replayed the footage, eyes wide, hearts hammering. The room on the screen was empty. For a heartbeat, relief flared. Then it wasn't. Emily stood alone in the frame. Her reflection distorted in the shadows cast by the single lamp in the hallway. And behind her, a figure. Hollow-eyed, inches away. Its mouth moved, whispering words none of them could understand. Not language, not syllables. They were sounds that clawed at the edges of sanity, scraping along the nerves. Emily dropped the phone with a muffled thud, the screen cracking slightly on the wooden floor. Her hand shook violently. What the hell is happening? She cried, voice raw with fear. Her eyes darted around the room, as if expecting the pale woman to materialize out of the walls, or leap through the shadows. Jake stood frozen nearby, silent. Too silent. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Emily's gaze snapped to him, panic and accusation twisting inside her. Jake, say something. He didn't. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he stared past her toward the windows. Outside, the storm had intensified. The waves pounded the rocks with relentless fury, white froth exploding into the night air, carried by the wind that now howled through broken gaps in the window panes. The house shuddered with each impact, a groaning symphony of old wood and unsettled air. Emily's chest tightened. She could feel the raw, electric panic prickling her skin, adrenaline twisting her stomach into knots. Her hands trembled. What is that thing? Why is it here? Why is it watching us? Her mind raced, grappling with logic and terror, with the impossible reality pressing in on her from every shadowy corner of the room. And then she saw it again. The figure on the beach. Through the window, illuminated by the ghostly reflection of the moon on the water, the pale woman had moved. She was closer now, every detail horrifyingly clear. Her hair clung to her face in soaked, matted strands. Her clothing hung in tatters, dripping wet, each movement deliberate, as if she were stalking some unseen prey. Her hollow eyes locked directly onto Jake. Emily froze, a scream caught in her throat. "Jake!" she whispered, the single word trembling with terror and disbelief. Jake's body stiffened. He did not step back. He did not move. The woman's gaze held him, unblinking, unrelenting. And though she said nothing, Emily felt her words, a cold, hateful accusation that slithered into the room and coiled around their hearts. She's outside," Emily stammered. Her voice cracked. "Jake, we have to go." Jake's eyes flicked briefly to her. "She's waiting," he muttered, barely audible. "She knows everything. We can't run." The wind howled harder, rattling the windows, tugging at Emily's hair and clothes, as if the storm itself were aware of the terror outside. The waves thundered against the cliffs, a deafening roar that made their hearts pound in rhythm with the ocean's fury. Shadows cast by the lamp twisted and danced across the walls, and Emily could swear the corners of the room stretched and shifted, trying to push them toward the hallway, toward the stairs, into the darkness. Her thoughts tumbled. Why is she here? What does she want? She wanted to cling to reason, but there was none left. Her fear collided with her anger. At Jake, at the house, at the invisible presence that had invaded their lives. She wanted answers, but the answers seemed worse than the questions. The woman's lips moved again. The sound was like a rasp of bones against each other, curling through the room, seeping into Emily's mind. And then the air shifted. The temperature plummeted, cold fingers of wind sliding under their skin, freezing their blood. Emily shivered violently, pressing herself closer to Jake, even as her gut told her he might not be enough. "She's coming," Mark whispered from the corner, voice hollow with disbelief. Lena clutched his arm. Ryan sank to the floor, holding his knees, eyes wide. Emily's gaze returned to the window. The pale woman was closer still, stepping carefully across the black sand, the moonlight glinting off her wet skin. Her eyes never left Jake. There was intention in her movement, deliberation in every step, and the raw, broken weight of something unspeakably violent in her posture. Jake tightened his grip on the bat, knuckles white. "Stay calm. Stay together," he said, though his voice was thin, trembling beneath the storm. Emily could feel the terror in his words, mirrored by the fear clawing at her own chest. She swallowed hard, fighting back a scream. Every nerve was screaming, every shadow now alive, every sound amplified into a heartbeat of impending doom. And through it all, the woman's gaze never wavered, drilling into Jake like an accusation, a demand, a promise. Emily's thoughts spiraled. We're trapped. We're being hunted. And she blames him. She blames him for everything. Her chest heaved with fear and fury. Love for Jake twisted into anger and panic. But even her anger could not mask the primal terror that threatened to consume her entirely. And then the wind shifted again. The waves erupted violently, throwing salt spray against the windows. The woman on the beach raised her arm, slowly, deliberately pointing directly at them. Emily's heart nearly stopped. The storm, the shadows, the haunted figure, everything coalesced into one impossible truth. They were not alone. And whatever was coming for them was not forgiving. Emily's hands trembled as she stepped into the kitchen, the dim light from the single overhead bulb casting harsh, elongated shadows across the walls. The storm outside rattled the windows, waves crashing against the cliffs below in chaotic rhythm, matching the wild thumping of her heart. She found Jake leaning against the counter, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the chipped tiles at his feet. He looked different, pale, tense, as though the wind itself had stripped the color from his skin. "Who is she?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking, a mixture of anger and fear, every word edged with desperation. Her palms pressed against the cool countertop for support, grounding herself as the panic in her chest threatened to pull her under. Jake didn't respond. He swallowed hard, throat working, and Emily could hear the uneven pulse in his neck. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the distant howl of the wind and the relentless crash of the ocean. "You need to tell me. Now," she said, stepping closer. Her green eyes locked on his, searching, accusing. Finally he broke. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of years of guilt had been pressed down upon him all at once. "Her name was Sarah," he whispered, voice ragged, trembling in the dim light. She died here." Emily froze. The words echoed in her skull. The room seemed to constrict around her, the wooden floorboards groaning under the tension. She could feel the cold draft sneaking in through the cracked window, tugging at her hair, sending a chill crawling along her spine. Her chest tightened painfully. Jake's gaze lifted, meeting hers for the first time. "We came here last year," he continued, voice barely audible over the storm. "Just me and her." Emily's heart splintered. Rage and disbelief collided with something darker, an icy, creeping terror that clawed at her chest. You cheated on me." The words were sharp, brittle, trembling with hurt. Jake didn't answer. His hands tightened into fists at his sides. The light above flickered, throwing their shadows long and warped across the walls. "She fell," he finally admitted, voice cracking. "Off the cliffs. It was an accident." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her stomach twisted. Her mind spun with images, waves smashing against jagged rocks, a scream carried by the wind, a body tumbling in slow motion. "Was it?" she asked, voice low, trembling, a razor of suspicion cutting through the fear. Jake looked up, eyes glistening with guilt, anguish etched into every line of his face. I didn't mean to. I tried to save her," he whispered. His voice broke, ragged. "But couldn't. She was gone before I even." He stopped, unable to continue. Emily felt her knees weaken. The room spun slightly, the shadows stretching across the floor as though alive. The distant crash of the waves was no longer just background. It was a heartbeat, slow and punishing, echoing the dread that now gripped her. Her hands pressed against the countertop until her knuckles were white. And then the truth hit her, cold and merciless, crawling up her spine and freezing her blood. This wasn't an accident. Something about the way he spoke, the way his eyes darted to the window behind her, the tightness in his jaw, she realized with horror that it had been something worse. And Sarah had come back. Emily's chest heaved as panic and disbelief twisted together. Her mind screamed, "She's here." Watching, waiting, angry. She could feel it, the same suffocating weight of presence she had sensed on the balcony, on the beach, in the hallways of the house. It wasn't a memory. It was real. Jake stepped closer, voice shaking, reaching for her hand. "Emily, I didn't know she'd come back," he whispered, eyes darting toward the window. "I swear I didn't." Emily recoiled. "Didn't know." Her words cut through the storm outside, jagged and raw. "Jake, she's out there. She's here. You brought this thing with you." The wind howled through the kitchen, rattling the windows. Rain splattered against the glass in jagged streaks, mirroring the panic in Emily's chest. The shadows across the room shifted unnaturally, elongating, twisting, as if something unseen was moving just beyond the light. She could almost hear the whisper of Sarah's voice, carried by the storm, a soft, accusing hiss curling into the edges of her mind. "You left me." Emily backed away, heart racing, sweat prickling on her skin despite the cold. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, voice trembling between fury and fear. "Why would you ever come back here knowing she—" Her words died in her throat as the realization of the relentless, patient presence outside slammed into her. Jake's hands shook as he reached toward the window, almost instinctively, but he didn't open it. His lips moved in a silent apology, and his eyes met hers, filled with guilt, fear, and an impossible helplessness. "I thought she would never come back. I thought it was over," he whispered. Emily's chest ached with a mix of fear, betrayal, and sorrow. The air in the kitchen thickened, the storm outside screaming against the walls. Every instinct told her to flee, to run into the night, but something deeper anchored her. Love twisted with terror, anger laced with desperation. She couldn't leave him, not yet. Then, a cold draft swept through the kitchen, extinguishing the light above, plunging them into darkness. The room seemed to contract, pressing in from all sides. Emily could hear the waves crashing, closer this time, violent and angry, like the heartbeat of something ancient and vengeful. And in that suffocating dark, she understood the unthinkable. Sarah had come back, not as a memory, not as a shadow, but as something alive, watching, waiting for them. Emily's eyes darted to Jake, her hand gripping his arm, trembling. "We have to do something," she whispered, voice tight with panic. But deep down she knew. Whatever had returned, it wouldn't let them leave. And the storm outside, the waves, the wind, the darkness, they were all accomplices to what was coming. A scream shattered the night like a thunderclap, jagged and raw, tearing through the coastal wind. Emily's heart lurched violently, adrenaline surging, and she spun toward the sound. The others followed, stumbling over jagged rocks and loose sand, the flashlight beams cutting thin streaks through the thick darkness. The storm had intensified. Rain hammered their shoulders, and gusts of wind pulled at their clothes and hair, making every step a battle against nature itself. Mark was gone. The realization hit Emily like a punch. Her throat constricted, panic rising in a tidal wave. "Mark!" she shouted, voice cracking. But there was no answer, just the scream of the ocean and the shrieking wind through the jagged cliffs. The group followed the faint trail of footprints left in the wet sand. Each step brought their stomachs tighter against the cliffs, the ground slick and treacherous. The prints ended abruptly at the jagged edge, carved by wind and wave into a fragile precipice. Emily froze, every nerve screaming at her that something was horribly, horribly wrong. Then they heard it, a sound that made their blood run cold. Wet dragging, a slow, deliberate motion across the sand. Emily's stomach flipped, her knees weak. She turned, flashlight trembling in her hand, and froze. Mark was standing there, but not alive, not human. His body was twisted in impossible angles, limbs bent like brittle twigs, and his face. Emily's stomach turned. His eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to absorb the faint light, and his mouth stretched in a silent scream that no human throat could produce. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" she whispered, voice trembling. The rain plastered her hair to her face, making it difficult to see, but she could feel the presence, the malice, the anger, radiating from him like a physical force. Then his lips moved. But it wasn't Mark's voice that came out. It was hers. "You all left me." Emily stumbled back, screaming, and collided with Jake. The wind whipped their faces, slicing through the fear and panic. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile what she was seeing. This can't be real. This isn't real. It's not real. But the hollow eyes, the twisted limbs, the wet dragging sound. It was undeniable. Mark, or whatever had taken him, lunged forward. His movements were unnatural, jerking in ways that defied human anatomy. The sand beneath him erupted as he closed distance in a terrifying, unnatural speed. Emily shrieked and fell backward, scrambling over slick stones. Ryan tried to run, bolting toward the edge of the cliffs, slipping on the wet sand. "No, don't!" Emily screamed, but the wind stole her voice. He didn't make it far. The darkness seemed to swallow him whole. A sickening crack echoed through the night, bones snapping under a force far greater than gravity. Ryan's scream was cut short, swallowed by the storm, leaving only the echoing, wet, dragging noise and the relentless pounding of the waves. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. Her chest burned, terror clawing its way up her throat, squeezing her heart. "Jake, what the hell is happening?" she cried, eyes wide with disbelief and panic. Jake's hands were shaking as he grabbed her shoulders, trying to ground her, to make sense of the impossible. We We didn't leave him. It's not. His voice broke as he looked at the twisted figure now stalking closer, Mark's hollowed face glistening with rain and shadows. It's her. Sarah. Emily's stomach dropped. Her mind flashed to the night in the kitchen, Jake's confession, the pale figure on the beach. It's her, she's here. Yes. The realization twisted in her gut like a knife. The force of her fear made her knees buckle. The wind screamed through the cliffs, rain lashing at their skin, and the waves below roared like some ancient beast, echoing the cries of the lost. The pale figure, Mark, stopped just short of them, tilting his head unnaturally, eyes fixed on Jake. The wet dragging sound continued, squelching in the sand as if the earth itself mourned the horrors unfolding. Emily's thoughts spiraled. Why him? Why now? Why here? Every instinct screamed to flee, but there was nowhere safe, no path clear. The darkness of the cliffs seemed to stretch forever, hiding unseen threats, while the storm threatened to rip them from the precarious edge at any moment. Jake grabbed a flashlight from Lena's trembling hands, swinging the beam toward the figure. Light danced across the wet, broken features, casting grotesque shadows on the cliffside. The figure hissed, or maybe it was a whisper, again in Emily's voice. You left me. The words echoed in her head, a chorus of fear and accusation. Her chest tightened so severely it was painful, and a scream tore from her throat, raw and desperate. She reached for Jake, and together they stumbled backward, away from the cliff edge, but the figure followed, impossibly fast, relentless. Emily tripped, crashing to the ground, sand and pebbles biting her palms. The wind carried the stench of salt, wet earth, and something fouler beneath it all, something unholy. Her eyes darted to the horizon, the jagged cliffs, the violent waves, realizing with cold certainty that there was no escape. Behind her, Mark, or Sarah inhabiting him, crawled with jerky, inhuman movements. The hollow eyes never left Jake, never left Emily, never left anyone. The sound of wet dragging, of bones snapping and cracking, merged with the storm into a symphony of terror that left her trembling uncontrollably. Emily's mind screamed, "We're trapped. There's nowhere to run. And she's not done." Lightning flashed, illuminating the figure fully for a brief, horrifying moment. Every limb twisted, dripping wet, mouth agape in a silent, impossible scream. The wind tore through the cliffside, carrying the faint whisper of Emily's own voice. You all left me. Her heart pounded so violently it felt like it might shatter. She clung to Jake, panic and love intertwined, knowing one wrong step, one misstep, could mean they'd all end up like Ryan, swallowed by darkness, consumed by something far beyond comprehension. And yet, through the terror, one truth became horrifyingly clear. This night, this storm, this relentless force, they were not natural. They were deliberate. And Sarah had returned to exact a reckoning none of them could have imagined. Emily collapsed onto the damp sand of the cliffside, shaking violently. Rain poured down in jagged sheets, soaking her hair and clothes, plastering them to her skin. Her chest heaved as if it might burst, and every heartbeat thundered painfully in her ears, in sync with the relentless roar of the ocean below. The storm whipped around her, lashing at her face, throwing shards of cold water against her cheeks as if the universe itself was punishing her. "This is your fault," she screamed at Jake, her voice raw, cracking under the weight of terror, betrayal and anguish. Her green eyes blazed with fury, reflecting the flashes of lightning that illuminated the dark sky in brief, violent bursts. Jake crouched beside her, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Emily, I didn't mean—" he began, voice quivering, almost swallowed by the storm, but she cut him off, her chest heaving. "You lied to me," she shouted, tears streaming freely, carving rivulets through the dirt and rain on her face. Her hands shook, digging into the sand as though anchoring herself to reality, but reality was slipping away under the storm's relentless assault. "You lied, about her, about everything." Jake reached out, his fingers trembling as they hovered over her shoulder. "I loved you," he whispered, the words almost lost to the howling wind. His voice carried desperation, remorse, and an almost unbearable longing. Emily recoiled, chest rising and falling rapidly, eyes wild with disbelief. "No," she spat through clenched teeth. "You loved her too. You always loved her." The truth cut deeper than the cold, the storm, the fear. It cut through her like a knife, carving raw, jagged lines into her heart. The wind picked up, whistling through the jagged cliffs, bending the rain into blinding sheets. The waves below crashed with violent insistence, their sound a deafening roar that seemed to echo the scream in Emily's chest. The lightning flashed again, illuminating the twisted, treacherous rocks below, throwing grotesque shadows across the storm-slicked landscape. Jake's face fell, eyes wide with helplessness. "Emily, I still love you," he said, voice trembling, raw and desperate. The rain plastered his jacket to his chest, his hand finally brushing against hers. But she jerked away, the instinct to escape stronger than her need for comfort. "No," she cried, shaking her head violently. "No, you loved her too." Each word was punctuated by a shiver of rage and fear. She felt exposed, raw, like the storm had stripped every layer from her soul, leaving her utterly vulnerable. This isn't just about us. This is her. Sarah is here. She's. Her voice caught in her throat as the wind carried a whisper, soft but unmistakable. "You chose her." Emily froze, a jolt of icy fear slamming into her chest. The words echoed across the storm, carried by wind and waves, curling into the shadows, wrapping around her spine like icy fingers. Her breath hitched, chest tightening painfully. The realization slashed through her with the precision of a scalpel. This wasn't random. This wasn't a haunting without reason. This was revenge. Her stomach lurched violently, nausea twisting her insides as the truth sank into her bones. Every scream, every shadow, every twisted figure. They weren't targeting them by accident. They were deliberate, intentional. Emily was part of the punishment. The ocean roared beneath her, waves smashing into jagged rocks with such force the cliffside shuddered under the storm's fury. The wind tugged at her soaked hair, whipping it across her face, obscuring her vision, and yet she could see everything. The flash of lightning illuminating Jake's anguished face, the dark, twisting shadows of the cliff, the looming threat of the storm and the spectral presence that had consumed their night. She pressed her hands to her temples, trying to stave off the panic threatening to overtake her. "How do I survive this?" she thought, terror spiraling into hopelessness. How do we survive something that isn't alive, that isn't human, that exists for nothing but vengeance? Jake knelt beside her, rain streaking down his face, eyes haunted. "Emily, we can still get out. We can still." She flinched at his words, fear and love colliding violently inside her. Her mind screamed in confusion and fury. How can I trust him? He's the reason this is happening. He brought her here. He betrayed me and now she's here. Alive, vengeful, and she's not stopping. A flash of lightning illuminated the shoreline below. For a split second, Emily saw her, the pale, drenched figure of Sarah, standing atop the jagged rocks, arms raised as if summoning the storm itself. Her hollow eyes locked on Jake, and Emily felt the weight of her gaze pierce through her like shards of ice. Emily's chest heaved. Tears mingled with rain on her face as she whispered, almost to herself, This is my fault too." Her words were swallowed immediately by the storm's roar, the crashing waves, and the shriek of the wind. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee, to survive, but she knew deep down that survival alone wouldn't save them. The storm surged higher, lightning cutting jagged lines across the sky, thunder shaking the cliffs beneath their feet. Sarah's voice echoed again, carried across the wind, repeating the accusation, sharp and cruel. "You chose her." Emily's gaze met Jake's. Her heart shattered between rage, despair, and the fractured remnants of love. I'm part of this," she whispered, voice trembling, eyes wide with panic. "She's punishing us, and me." Jake reached for her again, but the storm was between them, the elements and vengeance weaving a wall of horror and inevitability. She recoiled, chest heaving, soaked, terrified, and utterly alone with the realization that nothing, neither love nor loyalty nor hope, could protect them from what Sarah had become. And as the wind howled and the ocean roared below, Emily understood in the deepest part of her soul that this was no random nightmare. This was revenge incarnate. Emily was trapped at its center. Lena's fingers shook as she fumbled with Jake's old camera, rain-slicked hands making the buttons slippery. The storm outside battered the beach house relentlessly. Wind howled through broken windows, rain streaked across the glass, and the crashing waves below thundered like the heartbeat of some angry, unseen god. Shadows danced across the walls, cast by the flickering flash of the camera screen and the occasional lightning bolt slicing the night sky. I found something," Lena whispered, voice trembling. Emily and Jake crowded close, the tension between them a tangible force pressing against their chests. The room smelled of wet wood, salt, and something fouler beneath it all, a metallic tang that made Emily's stomach twist. Lena's hands trembled violently as she pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing shaky footage filmed near the cliffs, the wind whipping hair across faces, rain pelting the lens like shards of glass. There they were, Jake and Sarah, arguing. "You said you loved me." Sarah's voice was raw, desperate, tearing through the storm, echoing with pain. Her eyes glistened with fury and heartbreak. Emily felt her chest constrict, every nerve screaming as she watched the woman who had haunted them come to life in agonizing clarity. "I do, but I can't leave Emily." Jake's voice cracked, pleading, torn between loyalty and desire, and Emily's stomach churned at the sound. She wanted to throw the camera, scream at him, cry, but the scene was frozen before her, impossible to escape. Then, the moment that would shatter everything. Sarah stepped back, eyes wide with disbelief. Jake's hand reached out, almost touching hers. And then a push. A scream that cut through the storm, raw and piercing. It wasn't just heard. It vibrated in Emily's chest, in her bones. Sarah fell, the camera capturing every horrifying instant. The tumble, the jagged rocks below, the scream stretched impossibly long, until silence swallowed it all. Emily's chest felt hollow, stomach twisting violently. She dropped the camera, letting it clatter to the floor with a wet thud. You killed her," she whispered, voice shaking, trembling between fear, rage, and disbelief. Her hands clawed at her own hair, trying to anchor herself, trying to make sense of the impossible truth. Jake collapsed to his knees beside her, rain and sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. His face was contorted with guilt and desperation. "It was an accident. I swear it was an accident," he cried, voice breaking, echoing against the walls and mingling with the roar of the storm outside. Emily's teeth ground together. Her chest heaved. Her eyes glistened with tears that merged with the rain pouring in through the cracked windows. "No," she whispered, barely audible over the wind, every word a knife. "No, you chose me. And she died for it." The air in the room shifted. The temperature dropped suddenly, violently, as though the warmth of reality had been stripped away, replaced with something older, something angry. Frost formed along the edges of the window panes, and each breath came out in icy mist. The shadows in the room thickened, swirling, stretching toward them like tendrils. Emily's heart thundered in her chest, pounding so violently she felt it might burst. She turned slowly, dread coiling in her stomach like a living thing. And there she was, Sarah, standing in the doorway. Her clothes soaked, hair plastered to her face, but her eyes, hollow, infinite, unblinking. And then a smile. Small, terrifying, perfectly cruel. It was the smile of someone who had waited, who had plotted, who had returned for more than vengeance. She was alive but not alive. Something unnatural shimmered beneath her skin, something hungry, something that did not belong in the human world. Emily's knees buckled, hands clutching the counter for support. The storm outside seemed to respond, waves crashing louder, wind screaming more fiercely, as though the universe itself acknowledged Sarah's presence. Lena backed toward the wall, camera abandoned, flashlight shaking in her hands. Jake stumbled forward, panic and guilt etched across his face, but even he froze at the sight of her. "You!" Emily whispered, voice trembling so much it was barely audible. The words caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee, to hide. But where? There was no escape from this. Not in the house, not on the cliffs, not in the storm. Sarah took a slow step forward, each movement deliberate, her smile widening, eyes fixed on Jake. The shadows in the room twisted unnaturally, coiling along the walls and floor toward them, carrying with them the icy weight of something inhuman. Emily's mind raced. This isn't just about revenge. It's about punishment. And we're all part of it. Jake's lies brought this here, but I'm here too. Trapped, watching, waiting. Her chest constricted with fear so sharp it felt like her ribs might crack. "Sarah, I didn't." Jake began, voice quivering. But she didn't respond with words. Instead, the air vibrated, carrying the same soft, accusing whisper that had haunted their nights. "You left me." Emily's blood ran cold. Her stomach lurched violently. Her hands flew to her mouth, and she realized with a panic that made her heart stop. They were standing in the epicenter of something impossible. Sarah's vengeance was alive, present, and directed with horrifying precision. The storm outside screamed in perfect rhythm with Emily's terror. Rain hammered the roof, wind rattled the broken windows, and the relentless crash of waves below felt like the pulse of some angry, ancient force. Shadows writhed across the walls as Sarah advanced slowly, the smile never leaving her face, the hollow eyes never leaving Jake. Emily's mind raced, torn between love, guilt, fear, and the suffocating realization that nothing could stop what had been set in motion. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but even as she clutched Jake's arm, she knew the truth. Sarah was not here for apologies. She was here for reckoning. And the storm, the house, the night itself, were all part of her vengeance. The house began to collapse around them. It didn't happen all at once. It started with a crack. A deep, splintering sound that echoed through the walls like a bone snapping under pressure. Then another. And another. The wooden beams groaned, twisting as if something invisible was tearing the structure apart from within. Windows shattered violently, glass exploding inward in a rain of jagged shards that scattered across the floor like frozen tears. The wind surged through the broken frames, howling like a living thing, dragging curtains into the air, whipping them violently as the storm forced its way inside. Rain poured in sideways, soaking everything, walls, floors, skin, turning the house into something wild, untamed, and no longer safe. Emily stumbled backward, her breath hitching in panic. "Jake!" she cried, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Sarah moved closer. Each step she took was slow, deliberate, and impossibly loud. Her bare feet didn't splash in the rainwater pooling on the floor, yet every movement echoed like death itself, reverberating through the walls, through Emily's chest, through her bones. The shadows bent toward her, stretching unnaturally as if pulled by her presence. "You don't get to live your happy ending," Sarah whispered. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It slid into Emily's mind like ice, cold and sharp, wrapping around her thoughts until nothing else existed. Emily's heart pounded violently. Her hands trembled as she reached blindly for Jake, her fingers brushing his sleeve. He stepped forward before she could stop him. "Take me," Jake said, his voice hoarse but steady, though his body betrayed him. His hands shaking, his chest rising and falling too fast. "Just leave her." "No!" Emily screamed, lunging forward, grabbing his arm. Her nails dug into his skin, desperation surging through her veins. Don't say that. Don't you dare." But Sarah only smiled wider. It wasn't a human smile. It stretched too far, too perfectly. Her lips curling into something that radiated pure, quiet cruelty. Her hollow eyes locked onto Jake, unblinking. "You already chose," she said softly. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. Her breath caught. Her mind reeled. "You already chose." The same words echoed in her head over and over, blending with the storm, with the crashing waves, with a terror clawing through her chest. And then the ground beneath Jake cracked open. It started as a thin line, barely visible beneath the water pooling across the floor. Then it spread, splitting the wood apart with a violent, splintering force. The floor gave way beneath him, collapsing into darkness that seemed deeper than it should have been. Endless, consuming, alive. Jake stumbled, his balance gone. His body dragged toward the opening as if pulled by an unseen force. "Emily!" he shouted, panic breaking through his voice for the first time. She didn't think. She moved. Emily lunged forward, dropping to her knees as the floor shifted beneath her, the wood cracking and groaning under her weight. Her hands shot out, grabbing his arm just as he began to fall. Her fingers locked around his wrist, nails digging into his skin with desperate force. "Run!" Jake gasped, his body already slipping downward, the darkness swallowing him inch by inch. His other hand clawed at the broken floorboards, but they crumbled under his grip, offering no support. "Emily! Run!" But she didn't. She couldn't. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with rain as she shook her head violently. "I'm not leaving you," she cried, her voice breaking, raw with emotion. "Do you hear me? I'm not leaving you." Her arms strained, muscles screaming as she fought against whatever force was pulling him down. The wind roared around them, whipping her hair across her face, blinding her, but she refused to let go. For a moment, just a moment, everything seemed to pause. Jake looked up at her, eyes wide, filled with fear and something else. Something softer. Regret. Love. The kind of love that only shows itself when everything else is falling apart. "Emily," he whispered. And in that moment, love won. She tightened her grip, pulling with everything she had left, her body trembling, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. For a second it felt like she might succeed. Like she might pull him back from the darkness. Like this nightmare could end differently. But then, Sarah screamed. It wasn't human. The sound ripped through the house like a shockwave, high-pitched and guttural at the same time, a noise that didn't belong in the world of the living. It shattered what remained of the walls, cracked the ceiling above them, sent splinters raining down like deadly confetti. Emily's ears rang. Her vision blurred. The force of the scream hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Her grip faltered for just a second, just enough. The darkness surged upward. Jake's hand slipped from hers. "Emily!" His voice was cut off as the ground swallowed him completely, the cracks snapping shut with a deafening crash. Emily collapsed forward, her hands slamming against the broken floor, splinters digging into her skin. "No!" she screamed, her voice tearing from her throat, raw and broken. The house groaned one final time. The storm roared louder than ever, wind and waves crashing in a violent crescendo that drowned out everything else. The shadows twisted wildly, swallowing what little light remained. Sarah stood in the center of it all, unmoving, her hollow eyes fixed on Emily. And then, everything went black. Not darkness like night. Something deeper. Something final. The police arrived just before dawn. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered like a scar carved into the coastline. The sky was a dull gray, heavy clouds hanging low over the jagged cliffs, while the ocean below churned restlessly, its waves still violent, as if refusing to forget what had happened in the night. The air smelled of salt, wet wood, and something faintly metallic, like rust or something worse. The beach house stood in ruin, or what was left of it. Wooden beams jutted out at unnatural angles, shattered glass littered the ground like frozen shards of ice, and the once perfect windows were now empty voids staring out at the sea. Parts of the structure had collapsed entirely, leaving behind a hollow, broken skeleton of what used to feel safe, inviting, alive. Now it felt like a grave. "Jesus!" one officer muttered under his breath as he stepped over debris, his boots crunching against splintered wood and broken glass. "What the hell happened here?" Another officer shook his head, scanning the area. Neighbors said they heard screaming around 2 in the morning. Then nothing. He paused, glancing toward the cliffs. No bodies. No footprints leading away. It's like they just disappeared. Inside, the silence was suffocating. No wind, no voices, just the faint drip of water from the ceiling and the distant roar of the ocean below. The house felt wrong, like something had been here, and left behind an imprint that refused to fade. Then they found it. Camera. Lying in the center of what used to be the living room. Untouched. Dry. Perfectly still, as if placed there deliberately. One of the officers crouched down, picking it up carefully. "Still recording," he muttered, turning it over. The screen flickered to life, its pale glow cutting through the gray light of morning. "Let's see what happened," the other officer said quietly. They pressed play. The footage began shakily. The camera angle was tilted, capturing fragments of chaos. The broken walls, the shattered windows, rain pouring in sideways, shadows twisting unnaturally across the room. The storm was still raging in the video, wind screaming like something alive. And there they were, Emily and Jake, standing together in the center of the collapsing house. Emily's face was pale, her hair soaked and clinging to her skin, eyes wide with fear, but something else too, something deeper, something wrong. Jake stood in front of her, his body tense, his expression desperate, as if trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. The officers leaned closer to the screen, the faint crackle of the audio filling the silence of the ruined house. "Take me, just leave her," Jake's voice echoed from the recording, strained and broken. Emily screamed in response, her voice raw with emotion, but the words were lost in the roar of the storm. The camera shook violently as the house began to collapse further, beams cracking, glass shattering, the floor trembling beneath them. Then it happened. Suddenly, Emily pushed him. The movement was quick, almost unnatural. Jake's eyes widened in shock as his body stumbled backward, the floor beneath him splitting open into a void of darkness. His hand shot out, reaching for her, but she didn't move. He fell. The darkness swallowed him whole. The officers froze. One of them exhaled slowly, disbelief written across his face. She pushed him," he whispered. But the video wasn't over. Emily stood there, motionless for a moment, her chest rising and falling slowly. The storm raged around her, wind tearing through the broken house, rain soaking her completely, but she didn't react. Then her head tilted, slowly, unnaturally. Her face twisted. The expression that spread across her lips was not human. It was too calm, too precise, too knowing. A smile that didn't belong to someone who had just watched someone they loved fall into darkness. It was something else entirely. Emily turned toward the camera. Her eyes locked directly onto the lens, as if she could see through it, through time, through whoever would watch this later. The officers instinctively stepped back, a chill running through their bodies despite the daylight filtering through the broken walls. She smiled wider and whispered, "I chose." The video cut to black. The room fell silent again. The officers stared at the screen, their breathing shallow, their expressions unreadable. One of them reached out, as if to turn the camera off. But then they heard it. Second voice. Whispering. Not from the room. From the recording. "Good choice." Both officers froze. The voice was wrong. It wasn't Emily's. It wasn't human. It carried something beneath it. Something hollow, ancient, filled with a quiet satisfaction that made the air feel heavier. The camera screen flickered once. Twice. Then went completely black. At the bottom of the screen, one detail remained burned into the display. 2:17 a.m. The same time the power had gone out. The same time everything had begun. One of the officers swallowed hard, glancing around the ruined house. The silence felt different now. Thicker, heavier, as if something was still there, hidden just beyond sight. Watching. Waiting. "Did you hear that?" he asked quietly. The other officer didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the broken doorway, on the shadows stretching unnaturally across the floor despite the growing daylight. "Yeah," he finally whispered. A faint breeze moved through the house, but there was no wind outside. The shadows shifted. just slightly, and for a brief, impossible moment. It almost looked like someone was standing there, smiling,